This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. If you've seen Dune already, this clip probably feels different from what you remember. It's because I removed the score. I've seen many people talk about the film's imagery, and it's very impressive, but the first thing that greets you in this movie, before you even see the studio logos, is sound. And I think both the score and the sound design play a huge role in making Denis Villeneuve's new adaptation of Dune the experience that it is. I had a great time watching Dune, and walking out of the theater, one of the things I was most excited about was the film's score. The sound design and Hans Zimmer score add a huge amount of scale and texture to the world. It's wild and completely unlike anything else I've heard. Some of the sounds he created for this score are truly kind of terrifying. He uses layers and layers of voices, singing, chanting, whispering, yelling, throat singing, along with sounds from instruments that genuinely look like they could have come from Getty Prime. I fell in love with the score and what it brought to the film, so naturally I wanted to watch Dune without it. By controlling which of the surround sound channels are active in a video editor, we can get a sense of what a scene would be like without the dialogue or without the score. So I watched through a bunch of scenes with just the score and no dialogue, and just the dialogue and no score to see what I could learn about the score and the role it plays in the film. For Dune's score, Zimmer wanted to invoke sounds that felt like they came from a place thousands of years in the future. He didn't want the audience to ever hear a full orchestra, and instead wanted to focus on using sounds that felt like they came from the world of Dune. Typically in a score, you might have a melodic theme or a motif represent a character or a place, but for this adaptation of Dune, Zimmer leans away from that. He definitely uses certain melodic or rhythmic themes, like the rhythmic drum hit, repeated throughout the film in a variety of ways, often prefacing action or conflict. But Zimmer focuses more on connecting certain kinds of sounds to groups, influences, or settings, and then using those sounds to invoke those things. He relates the insane, grinding rhythmic throb with the Harkonnen. He uses this whispery female chanting for the Bene Gesserit. House Atreides gets more traditional, warmer sounds.
I told my father I didn't want this either.
So while Duncan Idaho has his own little theme, it also has a sonic connection to the sound Zimmer is using for House Atreides as a whole. And the desert and the Fremen get higher pitched sounds that invoke wind and sand, wind instruments like flutes, as well as vocalization that is distinct from the whispery, high-pitched singing of the Bene Gesserit. So this is where it gets really brilliant, I think. Dune is a complicated story with a lot of different things going on. There are many competing forces, and Paul as a character is struggling between different identities and callings. And associating different sounds and instruments with different ideas allows Zimmer to actually bring these different forces into conflict within a single piece or melody. For example, once we associate this sound with the Bene Gesserit, and this kind of sound with the Atreides and the Duke, listen to how these two ideas come into play in the score during this conversation alongside the dialogue.
Will you protect our son?
With my life.
I'm not asking his mother, I'm asking the Bene Gesserit.
When the Duke addresses Jessica as the Bene Gesserit, we hear the Bene Gesserit sounds come in.
Will you protect Paul?
And then when she tries to reassure him, we hear the House Atreides sound come in. But it comes in on top of the Bene Gesserit sound. If Zimmer had been relying here on a melody to communicate these two ideas, this would have been a lot more difficult, but instead both can exist within the same piece simultaneously. Another example is this scene. The higher-pitched dentist drill sound represents the pain being inflicted on Paul's hand by the box, and the vocalizations represent something being awakened deep within Paul. These two forces can actually exist and come into conflict within the piece. So we have the desert, the Bene Gesserit, the Fremen, House Atreides, and various prophecies represented in the score, and Paul struggles internally between all these roles and identities.
My Lord Duke.
In the book, we can actually read this play out in his internal monologue, but in the film, they decided to stay away from any kind of voiceover, and so the score helps bring that kind of internality onto the screen. And that's not to say the score isn't utilizing melodic themes, but Zimmer, instead of linking melodies to specific characters, with the exception of maybe Duncan, Idaho, uses them more to illustrate plot lines. There are complementary melodic motifs that follow Paul throughout his journey into the desert. And because Zimmer is using sound for locations and groups instead of melody, he can evolve how he's presenting that melody depending on where Paul is in his journey. For example, we're first introduced to this theme that follows Paul's journey into the desert with the warmer tones used for House Atreides. But there's also a sense of mournfulness and longing as he awakens from dreams of the planet Arrakis and the desert. And then when Paul is learning about the Fremen and the desert on Arrakis, we get this same theme, but it's a bit distorted, as if we're only getting a vague picture of the place.
To inhabit the remotest regions of Arrakis.
And finally, when Paul is flying over the desert, we get the theme again, but this time it's no longer distorted, it has a new intensity, and it's lacking that longing quality, as if to say, this is my new home. This melody marks a certain element of the plot, and the way it's portrayed sonically gives that plot an emotional arc. Zimmer uses another complementary melodic motif to represent pieces of this same journey into the desert. Look at how this moment is linked to this one, with both a visual and a melodic motif. While the soundscape of voices and instruments that Zimmer uses for each moment represents the two environments distinctly. These two complementary themes come together in the final scene as Paul advances even deeper into the desert. The track for Leaving Caladan and the film's climax are very similar, but while Paul is in Caladan, the vocals play more of a background role, while the track leans more heavily on the aggressive bagpipe-style sounds that we're associating with House Atreides. But for the film's climax in the desert, those sounds are still there, but they fall to the background while the vocals take the lead. Another example of how this plays out is with the Bene Gesserit Order. While they don't spend much time on screen, they play a huge role in the story behind the scenes. They're not visually present in the destruction of Arrakeen, but we know from the story they've played a part in orchestrating this betrayal. So I love that their influence on these events is felt through this scene because of their inclusion in the score. Similarly, when the Hunter-Seeker shows up, we're clued into the fact that it comes from the Harkonnens through the score before their involvement is revealed through the dialogue.
The Harkonnen agent was submitted into that hole 6 weeks ago.
Let's talk about Duncan, Idaho and his theme for a moment. As I mentioned, he's one of the few characters that gets a very blatant melodic theme. But I think that this theme is used in a clever way. Almost every time Duncan shows up, we hear his theme. But when he's sacrificing himself to defeat the Sardaukar, instead of hearing his theme, which would seem like the obvious move here, we get a nod to the Fremen musically. And then when Paul is going into combat with one of the Fremen, we actually hear Duncan's theme. And I think this helps to illustrate the interconnectedness of everything. Duncan has learned from the Fremen, and he uses that knowledge here in defeating the Sardaukar, and Duncan's theme here is a nod to the fact that Paul has learned to fight from Duncan, even though we never actually see that in the film. Now, I will say, if I have a critique here at all, it's that I think the score might be a little overused in some moments. I think it's a brilliantly constructed score, and I love how it sounds, but there aren't many scenes without any score at all. Watching some of these scenes, especially more intimate dialogue scenes without the score, made me feel like it might have been better to play some of these moments with a little less score.
Ever since you brought him before your Reverend Mother, he hasn't been the same. He's distracted.
The film in many ways feels kind of like it's rushing through a bunch of setup. When you drop the score out of some of these scenes, it slows things down and gives the characters a little more intimacy and room to breathe. And ironically, I think doing this would actually make the film score even more impactful when it is used, because the intensity would only be magnified in contrast to the quieter, more intimate scenes. But that's more of an issue with sound editing than it is with the score. I think it's an incredible and inventive score, one that for me doesn't just help make the film more exciting, but actually adds complexity to the story. Like Denis Villeneuve, Hans Zimmer has been a longtime fan of the book, and I think his knowledge of the material shows through his work. It's not just a score that sounds like it comes from a distant world in the far future. It's a score that takes the book's metaphysical and mystical elements, which take a backseat in the dialogue and exposition in the film, and weaves them into the story. For me, the success of this score is the way it adds to the dramatic conflict of the story, and the way it takes part in the world building, sounding like it's an artifact of the world itself. While watching the film to dissect the score, I discovered some cool ways sound design and mixing are used in the film, like how they got the Baron's voice to just sound so terrifying. So I've decided to make a companion video to this one that breaks those elements down. You can watch it right now on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service built and owned by creators, and the best way to get Nebula and access to that video is with the Curiosity Stream Nebula bundle, which you can get for less than $15 a year when you sign up using my link below. On Nebula, you can see bonus exclusive content from me, like my breakdown of Dune's sound design or my video about Omar Little's code from The Wire, but you'll also get access to all my usual videos early and without any ads or sponsors. When you sign up for the bundle using my link, you'll also get access to Curiosity Stream, where you'll find a ton of educational and documentary content. If you're interested in seeing very real, stunning desert visuals, you could check out the documentary Africa's Desert Storms on Curiosity Stream right now. This bundle is an amazing deal. For less than $15 for an entire year, you'll get access to 2 streaming services full of amazing content. Signing up and watching on Nebula helps support myself and other independent creators like me. Click the link on the screen to sign up now and watch my video on Dune's sound design.